1944. A rear area just behind the American front line, close enough that the war is a constant presence, and a German prisoner being moved through it sees something that does not belong in any war he understands. Steam, rising from a cluster of tents and trucks. And men, ordinary soldiers, filthy from the line, going in dirty and coming out clean, washed, in hot water, a few miles from the fighting. If you were that German soldier, you knew what a soldier's body felt like in the field, because you lived in yours, and it was one of the small, grinding miseries of war that nobody puts in the histories. You were dirty, not ordinarily dirty, profoundly, continuously, deeply dirty, in a way that civilians never experience, caked in mud and sweat and the grime of living in holes in the ground, wearing the same clothes for weeks until they were stiff with filth and crawling with lice. Cold, and wet, and filthy, with no prospect of being otherwise, because getting clean in the field was, for most soldiers and most armies throughout history, simply not something that happened. You endured the dirt the way you endured everything else, because there was no alternative. And here were the Americans, a few miles from the front, taking hot showers. Not a river to wash in when the weather allowed, not a helmet full of cold water. Actual hot showers, heated water delivered through shower heads in dedicated facilities brought forward for the purpose, and, you gathered, clean clothes afterward, the filthy louse-ridden uniforms taken away, and clean ones issued. The whole miserable weight of field filth simply lifted off a man and replaced with the almost forgotten feeling of being clean. The conclusion available to a German soldier was the one his whole military culture handed him, and it was the same conclusion his army reached about every American comfort: softness, decadence, pampering. What kind of army hauls hot showers to the battlefield? A serious soldier endures filth as he endures everything else. This obsession with washing and clean clothes is the mark of a people who have gone to war without understanding that war is hardship. He was wrong, and the thing he dismissed as pampering was, like the clean water and the dry socks and the hot food, a deliberate and highly effective military measure, one that touched the soldier's health, his morale, and his fighting effectiveness all at once, and that reflected, one more time, the whole American philosophy about the value of the ordinary man. Because getting a filthy soldier clean is not a comfort. It is a weapon, and it does at least 3 distinct things, each of which matters, and together they explain why an army would go to the enormous trouble of hauling hot water to the edge of a battlefield. This is not a story about showers. This is a forensic audit of the humble, unglamorous business of keeping soldiers clean, and of how one army treated it as an essential military function worth real resources, while the other, like most armies in history, treated the filth of the soldier as simply part of the price of war. Part 1. The German Calculus. We have to begin, as always, by being fair to the Germans, because the German army was not ignorant of the importance of hygiene, and it did make efforts in this direction, and early in the war, well supplied and operating from stable bases, those efforts were real. The German army understood the connection between cleanliness and health. It understood that lice spread disease. The typhus we examined in an earlier audit was carried by lice, and delousing was a recognized military necessity. It had bath and delousing facilities in its system. German military hygiene doctrine was, on paper, sound and reflected the sophistication of German medicine. So, once again, the German failure was not ignorance, it was the inability to sustain, at scale and under the pressure of a losing war, a function that required exactly the resources Germany was running out of. Consider what keeping an army clean actually requires. It requires facilities, bath units, shower units, delousing equipment, brought forward to where the soldiers are. It requires hot water, which requires fuel to heat it, and fuel was the German famine that never ended. It requires clean replacement clothing in quantity, which requires a supply of uniforms and the logistics to move dirty ones back and clean ones forward. It requires water, and the means to move and heat it. It requires transport to bring all of this close to the front, and organization to run it. Every single element competes for the scarce resources: fuel, transport, materials, organization. that Germany was desperately short of. And so, as the war went on and the German situation deteriorated, hygiene became one of the many things that fell away. It is not that the Germans did not know soldiers should be clean. It is that, in a collapsing war effort short of fuel and transport and everything else, hauling hot showers to the front was a luxury the system could not afford, and it dropped down the priority list behind ammunition and food and fuel, until for many German soldiers, especially in the hard-pressed later years, getting properly clean became a rare event, and living in filth became the normal state. And the consequences of that filth were not merely a matter of comfort, which is the crucial point the dismissive attitude misses. A dirty soldier is a soldier at risk. Lice spread disease. Skin conditions and infections flourish in filth. Wounds in a dirty body are more likely to become infected. The general health and resistance of a filthy, run-down soldier is lower. The filth that the German soldier endured was not just unpleasant, it was actively degrading his health and his effectiveness, contributing to the disease problem we examined earlier, wearing him down in ways that reduced his fighting value. And there was the morale dimension, which is harder to measure, but which every soldier understands. There is a particular, grinding demoralization in being filthy for weeks on end, in never being clean, in the constant discomfort of dirt and lice and stiff, filthy clothing. It wears at a man's spirit in a way that is difficult to convey to anyone who has not experienced it. Cleanliness, conversely, is restorative in a way out of all proportion to its apparent triviality. To be filthy for weeks and then, suddenly, to be clean, hot water, clean clothes, is one of the great restorative experiences available to a soldier, a brief return to humanity and dignity in the middle of squalor. The German soldier in the later years was increasingly denied that, because his army could not afford to provide it. And the denial cost something real, in health, in disease, in the slow grinding down of morale, even though it never appeared in any battle report. That is the German calculus. Full understanding of the importance of hygiene, undermined by the inability to sustain the fuel, transport, water, clothing, and organization that keeping an army clean at the front required, so that as the war worsened, the German soldier was left to live in a filth that degraded his health and wore at his spirit, one more preventable cost that a collapsing war economy could not prevent. Now let us look at the factory of cleanliness, the Americans hauled to the edge of the battlefield. Part 2. The American Answer. The American approach to keeping soldiers clean was, characteristically, to treat it as a serious military function deserving dedicated units, equipment, and resources, and to build a system that could deliver cleanliness to soldiers close to the front, on a large scale, as a routine part of the war effort. The Americans fielded specialized units whose job was, quite literally, to wash soldiers and their clothing. Mobile shower units, equipment that could heat water and provide hot showers, brought forward to rear areas close to the front, so that soldiers could be rotated back a short distance, cleaned, and returned. Mobile laundry units that could wash clothing in quantity, and systems for exchanging clothing. A soldier could come out of the line, shower, turn in his filthy louse-ridden uniform, and receive clean clothing in exchange, walking away clean in body and clothes both. Think about what a remarkable thing this is. The American Army considered the washing of soldiers important enough to create dedicated units, equip them, fuel them, and bring them forward to the edge of the combat zone, so that a filthy infantryman could be pulled back a few miles, given a hot shower and clean clothes, and returned to the line restored. This is not something armies had traditionally done. It represents a decision that the cleanliness of the ordinary soldier was worth a real, dedicated, resourced military effort. And the reason the Americans made that decision is that they understood the three things that getting a soldier clean actually accomplishes, and they valued all three. First, health. A clean soldier is a healthier soldier. Removing the lice removes the vector for typhus and other diseases. Clean skin and clean clothing reduce infections and skin conditions. A clean body is more resistant to illness. The shower and laundry units were, in a real sense, part of the disease prevention system we examined earlier, another front in the American War on the sickness that had always killed more soldiers than combat. Getting the soldier clean was preventive medicine, delivered with soap and hot water. Second, morale. This is the one that the dismissive German attitude most completely missed, and it is enormous. The restorative power of getting clean, for a soldier who has been filthy for weeks, is difficult to overstate. It is not merely pleasant. It restores a man's sense of himself, his dignity, his connection to the civilized world he came from. A hot shower and clean clothes could transform a soldier's spirit, lifting him from the grinding demoralization of filth back to something like human. The Americans understood, as they understood with the food and the mail and the cigarettes, that morale was a military asset worth investing in, and that the cheap, simple act of getting a man clean was one of the highest return morale investments available. A clean soldier fights better because he feels human again. Third, effectiveness. A soldier who is healthier and whose morale is higher is simply a more effective soldier. The health benefits keep more men in the line and fewer in the sick tent. The morale benefits sustain the will to fight. Getting soldiers clean was not a diversion from the war effort. It was a contribution to it, keeping men healthy and functioning and willing. And all of it was made possible by the same abundance that underlies everything in this series. The hot showers required fuel to heat the water. Fuel the Americans had in abundance, and the Germans did not. The clean clothing required a supply of uniforms so ample that a man could turn in his dirty ones and simply be given clean ones, an abundance of clothing that a resource-strapped Germany could not match. The mobile units required transport and organization that the vast American logistical machine could easily provide. The whole system of forward cleanliness rested on the fuel, the materials, the transport, and the organizational capacity that American abundance provided and German scarcity denied. And it is worth picturing how the system actually worked, because the Americans applied to the washing of men the same assembly line thinking they applied to everything else. A soldier came out of the line, filthy, and entered one end of the process. He stripped off his filthy, louse-ridden uniform, which went one way, to the laundry, or often simply to bulk delousing and cleaning. He moved through the hot showers, washing off weeks of accumulated grime. And at the far end, he was issued clean clothing from stock. Not necessarily his own uniform back, but clean garments of his size from a common pool, the whole exchange organized so that a stream of dirty men could flow in one end and a stream of clean men flow out the other, continuously, in volume. That is the American method again, unmistakably. Take a task, systematize it, run it as a flow process, and put ordinary men through it at scale. The bath and laundry units could process large numbers of soldiers, turning the individual, occasional, luck-dependent business of getting clean into a reliable, high-throughput system. It was cleanliness delivered the way the Americans delivered everything, industrially, in quantity, to the many rather than the lucky few. And the clothing exchange element deserves its own emphasis, because it is where the abundance shows most clearly. To let a man turn in his filthy uniform and simply receive a clean one requires a supply of clothing so ample that you can hold large stocks forward, absorb the dirty garments for bulk cleaning, and always have clean ones ready to issue. That is an abundance of basic material, cloth, uniforms, the manufacturing behind them, that a resource-strapped Germany, short of textiles as of everything else, could not begin to match. The clean uniform handed to a showered soldier was, like the cigarette and the ice cream, a small, everyday miracle of American material plenty. The German soldier lived in his filth because his army could not afford to clean him. The American soldier was pulled back, showered, reclothed, and returned, because his army had decided his cleanliness was worth a dedicated system, and had the abundance to provide it. Part 3. The River of Steel. The shower and laundry units are a small part of a much larger pattern, and it is worth stepping back to see the whole shape of it, because the cleanliness of the soldier connects to nearly every theme this channel has traced. It connects, first, to the war on disease. Getting soldiers clean and deloused was a central part of the disease prevention effort that let the American Army cross the historic threshold of losing more men to combat than to sickness. The showers and the laundry and the delousing were preventive medicine, and they belong alongside the clean water and the vaccines and the insecticide as part of the system that beat the oldest killer of armies. It connects to the theme of morale as a supply item. The shower unit sits alongside the field kitchen, the mail delivery, the cigarette ration, and all the rest as part of the American conviction that the ordinary soldier's morale was a military asset worth sustaining with real resources. Cleanliness was one more morale supply, delivered forward like the hot food and the letters, because the Americans understood that the psychological state of the soldier was as much a part of his combat power as his weapon. It connects to the theme of crew and soldier preservation. Everything we have seen, the medical system, the survivable tank, the rotation, the good food, reflects the American determination to keep the ordinary soldier healthy, functional, and effective, treating him as a valuable asset to be maintained rather than a consumable to be used up. The shower unit is one more maintenance system for the human being, keeping him clean, healthy, and whole, exactly as the recovery vehicles maintain the tanks. And it connects, above all, to the deepest theme of this entire channel, the value placed on the ordinary man. The decision to haul hot showers to the edge of a battlefield, to create dedicated units for the washing of ordinary infantrymen, to consider the cleanliness of a private worth a real and resourced military effort. This is, one more time, the expression of a philosophy that regarded the ordinary soldier as worth caring for, worth investing in, worth the trouble. The Germans, of necessity and to some degree by philosophy, let their soldiers live in filth. The Americans built a system to keep them clean because they had decided the ordinary man's health, dignity, and morale were worth it. And behind it all, the same foundation as everything else, the abundance of fuel, materials, transport, and organization that let the Americans provide, as a routine matter, comforts and care that a resource-poor enemy could not even contemplate. The hot shower a few miles from the front is, like the ice cream and the cigarettes and the fresh blood, a small window onto the vast material superiority that let the Americans fight the war while also caring for their soldiers in ways no other combatant could match. Part 4. The German Realization. The German realization about American cleanliness followed the pattern of every realization in this series: recognition of the enemy's advantage, understanding of its value, and inability to match it. German soldiers who were captured and processed through the American system experienced the difference directly: the showers, the clean clothing, the sheer organized abundance of an enemy who could keep even his prisoners cleaner than the German army could keep its own soldiers. And German soldiers in the line, living in their filth, could not help but be aware, through prisoners and through observation, that the enemy across the way was living differently, was being cared for in ways they were not. And the perceptive German understood what this meant. It was not just that the Americans were more comfortable, it was that they were healthier, their morale better sustained, their fighting effectiveness maintained by a system of care that kept them functioning. The filthy, louse-ridden, run-down German soldier was fighting at a disadvantage that had nothing to do with weapons, a disadvantage of health and morale and basic human condition, imposed by an army that could not provide what the enemy provided routinely. And they could not fix it, for the reason that governed everything. Keeping an army clean at the front requires fuel, water, clothing, transport, and organization. And Germany was short of all of them and getting shorter. It did not matter that German hygiene doctrine was sound, that German medicine understood the value of cleanliness perfectly well. The resources to act on that understanding were not there, and no amount of knowledge could substitute for the fuel to heat the water, and the clothing to issue, and the transport to bring it all forward. And the deepest German realization was, once more, the familiar one. The hot shower near the front was one more expression of a philosophy the German system could not match. The philosophy that the ordinary soldier was worth caring for, worth the resources, worth the trouble of hauling hot water to the edge of a battlefield to keep him clean and healthy and human. The Germans, of necessity, treated their soldiers' filth as part of the price of war, an unavoidable hardship to be endured. The Americans treated it as a solvable problem, worth solving, because the soldier who endured it was worth keeping clean. And that difference in valuation, expressed in something as humble as a hot shower, was the same difference that ran through every domain of the war. The German soldier, filthy in his hole, watching or hearing of the enemy's hot showers a few miles away, was experiencing one more small, daily, grinding reminder of the gap between an army that could care for its men and an army that could not. A gap that showed up not just in the great matters of tanks and fuel, but in the humblest and most human matter of all, which is whether a man could ever, in the middle of the war, simply be clean. If your father, your grandfather, or your uncle served in the quartermaster units that ran the showers and the laundries and the clothing exchanges, the unglamorous, unthanked work of keeping an army clean, or if he simply remembered, as so many veterans did, the almost unbelievable pleasure of a hot shower and clean clothes after weeks in the line, I would be grateful to hear his name in the comments. The men who kept the army clean did work that saved lives and sustained spirits and is almost never remembered, because cleanliness, like health, is invisible when it works. They are mostly gone now. What remains are the stories their families carry. Those stories belong in the record. Part 5. The Verdict. 1945. The war ends, and the humble business of keeping soldiers clean takes its place among the many unglamorous systems that, together, made up the American way of war and helped win it. So here is the verdict. The German army understood the value of hygiene perfectly well and made real efforts early in the war, but could not sustain the fuel, water, clothing, transport, and organization required to keep its soldiers clean as the war worsened, so that its men were increasingly left to live in a filth that degraded their health, spread disease, and wore at their morale, one more preventable cost that a collapsing war economy could not prevent. The American Army treated the cleanliness of the ordinary soldier as a serious military function worth dedicated units and real resources, and built a system that could haul hot showers and clean clothing to the edge of the battlefield, pulling filthy men back a few miles to be cleaned and restored and returned, keeping them healthier, sustaining their morale, and maintaining their effectiveness, because it had decided the ordinary man's cleanliness was worth the trouble. The German soldier who saw steam rising from the American shower units and thought pampering was making the last version of the error his army made about everything American. He saw softness where he should have seen a hard-headed system for maintaining the health, morale, and effectiveness of the fighting man. He saw decadence where he should have seen a nation so rich and so committed to the value of its ordinary soldiers that it could haul hot water to the edge of a battlefield to give a filthy private back his dignity. The Germans let their soldiers live in filth because they could not afford to do otherwise. The Americans hauled hot showers to the front because they could afford to, and because they had decided that even the cleanliness of the ordinary man was worth a dedicated effort. And in the end, that is the whole war in a bar of soap and a stream of hot water. One side endured the filth as part of the price of fighting. The other decided the filth was a problem to be solved, and solved it, because it had the abundance to solve it, and the philosophy that said the ordinary soldier was worth solving it for. The Germans could afford to let their men stay dirty. The Americans could afford to get them clean, and a clean soldier, healthier and prouder and more himself, was one more small piece of the reason they won. If this forensic audit gave you something to think about, hit the like button. It keeps this channel visible to the people who want the history the way it actually happened. Subscribe if you want the next audit, because there are more of these, more systems, more decisions, more of the invisible, unglamorous machinery that decided who won and who came home. And remember this about the small dignity of being clean. Nobody makes a film about a mobile shower unit, the trucks and the tents and the heated water, and the men who ran them, doing the humble work of washing filthy soldiers a few miles from the guns. It was not glamorous. It won no medals. It was just hot water and soap and clean clothes, delivered to men who had been filthy for weeks. But ask the veterans, and many of them will tell you, the memory of that hot shower, that first clean uniform after weeks in the mud and the lice and the cold, was one of the most intense pleasures of the entire war. A brief, almost overwhelming return to humanity in the middle of squalor and horror. It restored something in them that the filth had worn away. It made them, for a moment, men again, and not just filthy animals living in holes. And an army that understood that understood a hot shower could give a man back his dignity, and that a man with his dignity fights better than a man without it, was an army that understood something about the ordinary soldier that its enemy, for all its brilliance, never fully grasped. Mostly, when an American soldier had endured the filth long enough, there was a hot shower waiting a few miles back, and clean clothes, and the almost forgotten feeling of being human again. They deserved to be remembered, the quartermaster men, the shower and laundry troops, by the humble, human truth that the war was won not only with weapons, but with soap and hot water and clean clothes, delivered by a nation that had decided even the dirt on an ordinary soldier's skin was worth the trouble of washing away.